So what I've got here is a little all-in-one solution, an FPV camera, and with a built-in 25 milliwatt transmitter. And I have had a few people message me since I modified the previous little FPV transmitter if I could show how to make a cloverleaf antenna using a Hirose connector, because they didn't want to go to the effort of putting a SMA connector on here. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. So I'm going to save this camera for a future video where I'm going to take a look at the power output of this, and also take a look at these little dipole antennas that you get with these. I mean, it's a linear dipole antenna, so it's not circular polarized. And here I've got a little cloverleaf antenna that I've made up with a Hirose connector. And you know, a lot of people now have old laptops stuck under their bed or in their attic that are pretty useless, you know, Pentium 2, Pentium 3 laptops. And Wi-Fi has been around for quite a long time now, since prevalent from 2001 onwards. So in a lot of these old laptops that are pretty worthless these days, you'll find the little Coax connectors here to go into the Wi-Fi card inside, and it will have a Hirose connector on there, so you can salvage the Coax and make yourself a little cloverleaf antenna. And because this is circular polarized, it's really going to help you know, the range and the video quality of this a lot better than this little linear dipole antenna. So as for getting hold of the Hirose connectors themselves, as I said, you can normally find these salvaging them out of old laptops, but you can also buy these little pigtails off eBay. I picked 5 of these up for just a few pounds from China. You can also get them a little bit shorter as well, and you may say, well, why don't I just use one of these that's a little bit shorter and connect a normal SMA cloverleaf onto this. But because the legal transmitters anyway in the UK, and I think quite a few other countries as well have followed suit, is only 25 milliwatts. The amount of loss that you get from connectors alone is quite a lot, so it probably suck up most of your 25 milliwatts straight off the bat before it even gets to the antenna itself to radiate out that signal. So that's why I would stay away from using something like this as a way to get a you know, a cloverleaf, more traditional SMA connector cloverleaf connected up to that, purely because of the loss of the cable, and especially with all those connectors as well. So we're going to make the elements first, and this is the copper wire that I used to make the elements for a 5.8 gigahertz cloverleaf, and I stripped this out of earthing wire and basically just straightened them out. It's by far the cheapest option that you can get. You can buy copper on reels, of course, but this is far cheaper to do it this way. And because people will ask about the diameter of the wire, it's 0.9 millimeters in diameter. Now, as for the measurements that I use for this, and it's not a particularly broadband antenna, so it's not going to cover a huge part of the spectrum, but I try and aim for just over 5.8 gigahertz, and the measurements that I use for one full wavelength is 51.6 millimeters, and for the 2 short legs 12.9 millimeters. Now you can go ahead and you can measure each element off at you know, 51.6 millimeters, but this is quite small stuff compared to 2.4, and the chances of you getting each piece of copper wire cut off at exactly the same length, measuring by hand, are pretty slim. You know, you're going to be cutting off several pieces until you're happy that you've got 3 identical pieces. So what I do is I use a straw. So I've measured this straw off at 1 full wavelength at 51.6 millimeters, and then I use this to get all my 3 pieces for my elements, and then I've got another piece of the straw here, and that's at 12.9 millimeters, and then I use that to put the 2 bends in for the 2 short legs. So if you really take your time to measure your plastic straw just once and get that measurement spot on, You can then use that plastic straw to measure many elements. So basically I've got it on the bench here vertically. I take some tin snips and I rest the tin snips on top of the straw and then simply snip, and I've got one element there cut off to the correct length. Again, take my copper wire, rest my tin snips, trim, I've got two, and for the third, again, resting on the top of the straw, and now I've got three elements, all identical size, measured correctly to the length of the straw, so I don't have to worry about measuring each one individually. So now I'm going to put the bends in for the two shorter legs, and these are my favourite pliers for this. They're long needle nose pliers, but they've got this flat part here that really helps when you're making antennas, especially biquads as well, because you can use this flat surface to butt up against your measuring tool to put your bend in. So these I really like. So now I take my small straw like so, then I get my pliers here, rest my pliers on top of that straw, grip it tightly, I can pull it away, and I've got the correct length here at 12.9mm, and I'll just put myself a little bend in like that. And I do exactly the same with the opposite side. Rest my pliers on top of the straw, grab it tightly, and then put the second bend in. And I do the same for all three elements. Just takes all that time out of trying to measure them off individually. It's just a lot better this way, and you'll produce a a much cleaner and more accurate antenna this way as well. So now I'm going to put the bend in the elements, that curve that you have with the middle element here. The middle element is half wavelength long, and the two legs are a quarter wavelength each. Now I've got a piece of tubing here, it's 18.5mm in diameter, and I use this, it works out really well to put the curve into the elements. Doesn't have to be so precise. I mean, you probably work just as well with something that's 17mm in diameter, but this works out really well for the bends. But basically just get anything that's close to that kind of diameter and just carefully bend your copper wire like so, and press on with your finger just to get any ripples out of that, so it's a nice smooth curve. And then we've got one done, so we just do the same to the other two. So now that I've got my curve in there, I'm just going to use my flat needle nose pliers here just to bend those quarter wavelength legs in a little bit, so they're just almost touching, and you want to do this quite uniform. You just visually inspect them like so. So now I'm going to put the bends in the two quarter wavelength legs here, and also tin them up to prepare them to solder them in place. And where I put the bends on these, that's when we're going to decide now if we're going to make a right hand polarized cloverleaf or a left hand polarized cloverleaf. So if I want to make a right hand polarized cloverleaf, I've got my leg here on the right. What I would do is push that down and gently pull the left leg up a little bit, so we've got something like that. The gap in between here and here wants to be around 6mm, but don't worry too much about that just yet. And that would be a right hand circular polarized element there. If I wanted it the other way around, of course, then I'll just bend them in the opposite direction like so, but this one's going to be a right hand. Basically I make everything a right hand, and then you know, you're not having to look just to double check you haven't got a mismatch. So basically I always stick to the right hand side, and then just tin up the tips of each one of those legs with just a little bit of solder. So now I'm going to trim the appropriate length of coax that I need, and also prepare it ready for soldering up. Now, because this LMR cable here is quite thin, you want it to be quite short really, otherwise it's going to start flapping around too much. So this one here is about the right length, and you can see it's 40mm long. So I'm going to trim 40mm off here, probably just a little bit extra about there, just to make sure I don't mess anything up, because obviously I can't add coax to it later. So now I'm going to cut away 10mm of this insulator here to expose that outer braid. Now you could use wire strippers for this, but I've often found in the past they can cut through that outer braid and then just mess everything up. So I use a sharp knife here, rest the coax on your finger like so, and then just very gently score through that insulator, just rotating it as you go. It's only really thin stuff this, and then you can use your finger and thumb and just pull that away. Like so. So you can see I've exposed that outer braid, and what I want to do now is just push it down into a little bit of a clump, and that'll give me a base to solder my elements onto. So just get it all clumped down at the bottom. And then I'm just going to run some tin along there so it's got a nice firm base. And of course the camera wants to focus on the crocodile clip and not the coax. So you can see now we've got that outer braid there, and it's flooded with solder. So now what I do is get my flat needle nose pliers again and just flatten out that disc. Working my way around, and now I've got a nice base there to solder my elements on, and because I've gone around and flattened it out, you can almost make out 3 points around that coax. And of course when we get our elements soldered on, we can tidy up any excess, just cut it away that we don't need. And now what I want to do is trim away some of this insulator here to expose the inner core, and then we can tin up to that as well. So remember, we want about 5 to 6mm of gap here, so just going to trim it away around there. Again, just using my knife, gently scoring all the way around, and then you can gently just pull that away. So now I'm going to start soldering my elements in place, and I've got them held in these tweezers here because heat does travel up this copper wire pretty quickly and you'll end up burning your fingers. But I've got it held in place here. I'm going to try and do this on camera, but it's really tricky, I have to say. I'm going to solder the bottom one in first, and when I've got all the bottom ones soldered in of all 3 elements, then I'll solder the top ones in as well. But we'll do it separately. So we'll just get it lined up into the position. Don't worry too much about the top one at this moment in time, but because we've got everything tinned up, a little bit of heat there, and we've got the first element in place. So I'll just rotate it now, get the second one in place, and you kind of get a feel with how much heat, you know, try not to hold it on there for too long because you'll end up desoldering the first one that you did. But basically get it lined up, and I'm looking at the camera at the moment to see if I've got everything lined up correctly. But hold it in place, a little bit of heat. The second one soldered, and now finally the third one, and this is when you start to run out of space where you can get your soldering iron in. But I'll just feed it through the top here, a little bit of maybe from the bottom, a little bit of heat, soldered in place. And now basically the second legs here, the ones at the top, what I'm trying to do is bend them to get them in position so they're sat exactly where I'm going to solder them in place, so then I can just come in with a soldering iron, put a blob of solder in the middle there, and I've got them all three soldered up together and soldered to the coax as well. So that's what I'm doing, so they're all just touching, and then I can come in with a soldering iron. So you should be able to see there I've got them all just touching with the coax in the middle there. So I'm just going to put it in the glamp and a little blob of solder in there. And just visually check that you've got a good connection there with all three legs and the coax. And finally what you need to do then is just go around and get everything bent nice and evenly. As I said, don't worry too much when you're soldering it up, because you can bend them quite a bit to get them in place. You can see I've got a bit too much of a gap there compared to these two, but that's because I did this one on camera. So let me go ahead off camera and just tidy everything up a little bit, and also get rid of any bits of scabby bits of solder down here that we don't need anymore, just to, you know, tidy everything up. So that's the Cloverleaf finish then. It's not the tidiest one I've ever made, but to say that I made it on camera, I'm pretty pleased with this. It really is difficult soldering on camera, because you're soldering a lot further away from your body than you would normally do. But basically now I'm just going to get some epoxy putty, put it around the centre there, tidy everything up a little bit, and just put some normal acrylic spray paint on there, just to, you know, give it a bit of colour and make it look a lot neater. So I hope you found this video interesting and got some value out of it. And yeah, you can get your coax from old laptops, but you can also buy these pigtails and cut them off, and just use this part here with the Hirose connector at the end. And even if you're not wanting to make yourself one of these you know, Hirose connector cloverleaf antennas, just the, you know, the little trick of using some straws to make it much easier for you to construct one of these antennas. You know, it's just these little tips that make it a lot easier to do, and especially these pliers. I'll put a link to these in the description on Amazon. And you know, I've got two pairs of these. I've had them for years. They really are an indispensable tool when it comes to antennas. And even these little side cutters that I use, you can see I've broken a bit off the end there, but these are Warhammer side cutters to use to put the Warhammer kits together. No, I'm not a Warhammer fan, but somebody gave me a pair of these many years ago now, and these are just fantastic side cutters. They really are better than anything else I've ever come across on you know, eBay or Amazon or any other kind of company. They really are good. So hopefully a few of those tips would help you in general, just building cloverleaf antennas with SMA connectors, and you know, getting your measurements really precise, because with these higher frequencies, just being out that little bit of a you know, millimetre or half a millimetre can really send your antenna outside of where you want it to be. You know, I mean, you build an antenna, you think it's transmitting well at say 5.845 gigahertz, but in reality you made it a little bit bigger, a little bit short, and you're just out of the range of that. So hopefully you did find it interesting, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Any comments or questions, drop them below, and you know, if you do have a go at making one of these to upgrade this little dipole antenna that you get with some of these kits, I'm sure, you know, even if you haven't got a lot of experience at making these, that you'll see a big improvement in that. So if you do build one, drop a comment below and tell us how you got on, and hopefully you'll join me on the next one.